It was evening time. Smooth transition from active day to night rest. The windows of the apartment on the second floor were lit. Light, cozy living room in minimalist style. Sofa, armchair, table. Houseplants twining along the walls like vines. The bedroom was in perfect order. The linen was plain and muted. There was a stack of books and a fan on the nightstand. In the wardrobe, t-shirts of various colors hung neatly on hangers. And next to them on the shelf rested multicolored socks. The girl suggested that he get dressed first, and suggested that he choose himself. The brunette was completely naked. His trapezoid torso was moderately muscular. Light eyes were set off by wide, coal-black eyebrows. The bangs fell slightly below the forehead. The young man was a little scared and confused. After thinking for a while, he chose black underwear for himself. He immediately hurried to put it on his body. The girl noted to herself that he was calm and confident. His movements were clear and consistent. Our heroine was pleased with the result. After all, the previous models did not know how to obey and behaved like slaves. The brunette asked about the possibility of asking a question. The interlocutor indicated her readiness to listen. The brunette didn't know his name. He asked his assistant. The name was originally symbols and numbers. After thinking, she answered that his name was Victor. Victor thought about his name for a while. There was a main character in literature with that name. A doctor who created a monster. The young man looked through the clothes, looking for something. In his mind, the mistress promised that he would not become a monster. After all, he was originally born to give and receive love. Standing in only underwear, the clone asked for an opinion on his clothes. An approving answer followed and an invitation to get dressed and go out into the living room. The room was perfectly clean. Everything was laid out meticulously correctly and on the shelves. The girl was sipping coffee, standing in an expectant pose. She turned at the sound of footsteps. The clone chose to wear a snow-white shirt with the sleeves slightly rolled up. Gray straight trousers emphasized his perfect figure. He put on soft slippers. Our heroine thought how gorgeous the young man was. She asked Victor to tell about himself. The brunette told everything clearly and distinctly. That he was created to love and be loved by his mistress. The clone said that he obeys any whim of the girl. After all, his destiny was to serve the happiness of his mistress. And he also adhered to the 3 laws of clones. The girl put the cup aside. The tester touched Victor's face. She praised him reservedly. The clone looked at the girl attentively without looking away. Our heroine looked at the clone with surprise and some delight. He looked like he was alive. Victor thanked her, calling her mistress. There was a request not to call her that. The clone was confused and asked how to address her then. The name Nuna came to mind. But then I thought that right after meeting I shouldn't have closed the distance so quickly, and so she decided to leave it as is, which she told the clone. Victor asked her name. The tester introduced herself as Lee Yuri. The subject repeated her name to better remember it. Victor thought about it. It seemed he was even quietly muttering something to himself. After a pause, he said that her name was very beautiful. The girl noted to herself that no one had said such a thing to her for a long time, and she even felt a little sad, lowering her head. After a pause, she offered the clone a cup of coffee. Her personal relationship with her husband at some point went down the drain, and the question arose whether it was really possible to fix everything. And at this time Victor came up and, behaving absolutely harmoniously, put his hands on the girl's hips. He thanked the hostess, and reached for a cup of the invigorating drink. At that moment, the guy was as close to her as possible. Victor looked down at the girl, and with the most serious expression on his face, he said that she smelled very nice. Lee Yuri looked back and asked again. The tester noted that the clone was hugging its owner sweetly. She didn't need it. But he was so warm. Sadness suddenly washed over her. Our heroine suddenly remembered her cheating husband, and she thought that he had hugged his mistress Jenny in the same way. She asked Victor what he felt at that moment. The clone replied that he felt lonely. Lee Yuri asked again in surprise, and she couldn't understand the reason for that. Victor wanted hugs, said he was worried. The tester was amazed, and wondered if a clone could feel such feelings. The guy said she had someone else in mind. It turned out that it was jealousy. But what was most surprising was that he wanted love. Our heroine sadly asked herself if Jenny had looked at her husband in the same way. The clear blue sky was covered in places with light white wisps of clouds. Office buildings, all alike, rose into the sky. Someone called out to the doctor. Lee Yuri looked over her shoulder at the sound of the voice. It was Jenny. A girl in short shorts and a badge around her neck hurried down the corridor, clicking her small heels. Looking boldly at the doctor, she said hello, and assured that it was an honor to meet her. Lee Yuri assessed the stranger with her eyes. She concluded to herself that she was clearly not even 25 yet. Our heroine's fists clenched, revealing the emotions she was holding back. Having mastered herself, the doctor politely responded to her young colleague's greeting. She introduced herself with her full name, but she really wanted to ask about something else. Did the girl sleep with her husband yesterday? Jenny smiled broadly. She said that she was glad to meet for the first time, although she had heard a lot about the doctor. Lee Yuri asked who the information was from. The girl hesitated and muttered something indistinctly, like, "Someone told the work." Jenny heard about the popularity of the genius engineer and the best clone tester, and she added to herself that she was also a fool, unable to cope with her own husband. The girl suggested going inside. The interviewers were already waiting there. Our heroine sat on the couch next to the brunette in front of the cameras. He introduced the viewers to Dr. Lee Yuri, the corporation's chief inspector. The audience applauded as one. Among them was a smiling Jenny. It was curious what the girl was thinking at that moment, and whether she considered Dr. Lee Yuri pathetic. Our heroine could not ask for the fact that the girl slept with her husband, and now looked at her so calmly. Mentally asked her to wait, promising retribution. The doctor told viewers that the clones were created using two techniques. First, tissues were reproduced using stem cells. Then bioprogramming introduced artificial intelligence. A decade ago, when clones first appeared, they were hailed as a revolutionary invention. Back then, the clones were used as slaves, which they gratefully accepted as their due. Lee Yuri reported that recently there has been a growing awareness of clones as being similar to humans, and this has touched on the issue of clones, especially their rights. The girl was consumed by anger and the realization of betrayal. She just wanted to become a clone herself, and gratefully accept everything as her due. She couldn't believe that she still loved the man who betrayed her and cheated on her with another woman. Then, in response to the clone's remark, she asked him not to be upset, and suggested that he take it for granted. Victor asked if the problem was in the man. The tester replied that she was thinking about her husband. Before the clone appeared, she was married to another person. Victor wanted to say something, but the doctor interrupted him, asking him not to ask about her husband anymore. She knew that the clones followed orders without question, and so she hoped that Victor would not ask about her personal life without asking. Our heroine had no intention of pouring out her soul to the clone being tested about her husband, but noticing the expression on her interlocutor's face, she asked Victor if he was really sad that she was married. The clone said quietly that he just wanted her love, and wished it were a little more. The doctor wondered what it was like for a man to find out that the woman he loved was married to another man. The tester stroked Victor's cheek and asked for his forgiveness. Direct eye contact dragged on. Lee Yuri admired his dark, thick hair, light expressive eyes, and perfect face shape. The girl decided that it was time to test Victor for the first physical contact. Bringing her face closer to his lips, our heroine closed her eyes, listening to her feelings. The previous clone model looked like a human, but this one seemed more human than the humans themselves. The tester tore herself away from the subject's lips and admitted to herself that this was the first time she had felt something like this towards a clone. The girl's lips reached out to him again. She couldn't understand why Victor had become someone special to her. Lee Yuri admitted that her husband's betrayal and desire to take revenge on him were doing this to her on a subconscious level and clouding her judgment. Here she decided to use her willpower to stop. She decided that this was enough, and with both hands on her chest, she pushed the clone away from her. Victor couldn't understand why such a sweet moment had to be interrupted, and he asked the girl why she had suddenly done this to him. The tester stated that in her opinion this was already enough for the first kiss, but the subject did not give in. He resolutely pulled the girl by the waist to himself. The girl demanded that Victor stop. The clone asked the owner if they could make their first kiss last longer. The subject's lips pressed against Lee Yuri's. It was on the verge of ecstasy. It seemed like she was about to choke when Victor broke off the kiss. The tester looked at the young man with delight. This was a clone created for love, or rather, a creature created to love. The doctor told Victor that he looked just wonderful. Then the girl caressed his cheek. The clone admitted that he was happy. The couple stood by the door for a long time. They just looked at each other in silence. The tester was the first to break the silence. She said that it was time for her to leave. The clone quietly whispered that he would miss his beloved. His voice enveloped the girl like warm powdered sugar. Victor put his arm around the girl. She reciprocated. In a short time, the doctor had already gotten used to his touch. After going down the steps, Lee Yuri looked back at the clone. She said goodbye to him until tomorrow. The guy stood there for a long time and looked sadly after his beloved until she got into the car and started the engine. Lee Yuri confidently got into her car. It was already dark. Suddenly the phone beeped. The doctor answered the call. It was Lam Oni. She couldn't wait for the head tester's reaction. The caller asked if Lee Yuri would come to the office to report. The doctor answered affirmatively, adding that she was already on her way. Our heroine's car maneuvered deftly in the flow of city cars. It stood out as a bright spot against the background of the faded colors of other cars. It was already getting dark. The whole city was ablaze with lights from the windows of numerous high-rises. Soon the doctor was at the building of the company's main office. Lee Yuri told her interlocutor that she was simply a miracle. The girl had already finished her report, and our heroine had not sent hers yet. The colleague said that the report can always be read. She wanted to know the girl's first emotions. Lem was all in anticipation, ready to listen. The doctor chuckled. She declared that the clone had become very similar to a human. The colleague sighed with relief and lay down on the table. Lee Yuri shared that this was the first clone who experienced loneliness and sadness. She wondered if he was given such traits on purpose. It turned out that the idea belonged to her husband, Jong-ho. When the name was mentioned, the girl's heart sank. A colleague asked what physical characteristics the subject possessed. The doctor noted the appearance, physique, and improved voice, although these were personal preferences and were not included in the assessment sheet. Lem asked the girl not as a tester. She was interested in what attitude Lee Yuri thought towards the clone of a woman. The doctor replied that as a professional, she believed that love between a human and a clone was impossible, and she herself had not looked at men for a long time. The colleague thought that all this was nonsense. After all, the lead tester had a legal spouse. There was an unbearable weight on our heroine's heart. There was a need to open up to someone. She wanted to ask Ani one question. The colleague was ready and asked what they were talking about. The girl shared that Jong-ho had not been himself lately. It seemed as if he didn't like his wife. He behaved distantly, but his interlocutor didn't understand what she meant. The doctor found it difficult to describe her husband's detachment. The guy was cold even immediately after the wedding. Lem assured that the guy was kind and responsive, and she asked whether her colleague was winding herself up. Lee Yuri replied that she would not doubt without solid evidence. The colleague was surprised and asked her to clarify. She asked how the couple was doing with their intimate life. The doctor admitted that she had not slept with her husband for over a year. Jong-ho began sleeping on another bed, and sometimes the couple could sleep together, not seeing each other for days. A colleague was interested in whether there had been any attempts to talk about it frankly. It turned out that the girl did not have the courage to ask. Lem expressed regret and admitted that she sympathized with her colleague as if she were her own sister. Our heroine asked for forgiveness. That burdened her with her conversations about her personal life, to which the girl replied that discussing the problem was already half the solution. The colleague took Lee Yuri by the hand and assured her that she could share all her worries with her. Lem promised to pretend that she was not aware and watch Jong-ho, see how he changed and what he was worried about, and whether there was another woman in his circle of friends. Our heroine buried her face in Lem's hands. In a quiet voice, she thanked her for listening. Now the girl felt better. The windows of the high-rise apartment buildings were burning, more than half. The elevator was going up to the 5th floor. Lee Yuri tried to calm herself down. She used the breathing technique of meditation. She recalled her colleague's advice that it was worth starting a conversation. With a slight smile and as if by chance, what would it have cost to suggest going for a drink and having a heart-to-heart talk? Lem also recommended that the girl dress up a little. After all, being beautiful could dispel the coldness emanating from her husband. Lee Yuri stood in front of her apartment door. She was gathering her courage. It was important not to be stupid. Our heroine hoped that the spark of love between her and her husband had not yet died out. The girl entered the code for the lock. It beeped in response. Soon the mechanism clicked. The door opened. There were 2 cups on the table. Lee Yuri's face twisted into a grimace. She was having a hard time containing her emotions. The husband was sitting at the table in a closed pose. Looking up, he said dryly, "Oh, you've come." The girl was a little taken aback by such a meeting. There was a young lady sitting at the same table. She said that she had recently seen the doctor in the office and that they had met again in the evening. Lee Yuri mentally called the girl impudent for daring to come into her house. Our heroine clarified what all this meant. The husband was outraged by her behavior. Frowning, he emphasized that she was rude to the guest. The doctor noted to herself with displeasure that her husband's attitude was simply disgusting. She loudly but calmly told the girl to leave the house immediately. The young impudent girl asked again in surprise and apologized. And then she added, turning to Dr. Lee, that she asked for her forgiveness if she had inadvertently offended her in any way. The man asked Jenny not to apologize. After all, the girl came at his invitation, and she herself was not guilty of anything. The wife lost control of herself. Starting to shout, she asked her husband why he behaved like that in her presence he took the other side. She quickly approached her husband and grabbed him by the shirt. She angrily told him that he could have shown at least a drop of respect, and she was surprised to herself that she had lived so long under the same roof with this monster. The husband replied that it was impolite to behave like that in front of a colleague. The guest got up from the table. Jenny said goodbye as she left, turning over her shoulder and saying that she would see him tomorrow at the office. Taking her bag and clothes, the girl hurried to the exit. Soon our heroine heard the door slam behind the guest. Left alone, the husband came close to Lee Yuri. He said that she had completely lost her mind. She said that the husband looked crazier for daring to bring his mistress into the house than the wife who caught them. The man retorted that Jenny was a colleague from Hongbo's department, that they were discussing the fact of including information about the new clone model to the newsletter. He was indignant that his wife behaved like she was sick, that she dared to call him a mistress even without knowing the person. Our heroine came to the conclusion that her husband was going to make her look like a complete fool until the very end. She replied that she knew everything. The man concluded that his wife had gone crazy, which meant she needed treatment. Lee Yuri said that she knew about his infidelities. There was only silence in response. Her husband, with his lips pressed together, looked at her coldly through his glasses. The wife couldn't stand it. Krisha started asking if her words were true. Was it true that her husband had another woman? Jung-ho confirmed dryly and briefly. Shocked by his words, our heroine, unable to stay on her feet, sat down on the floor. The look in her husband's eyes made it clear that Lee Yuri was not the one he loved. It was terrible. The man was lying in bed reading something with a smile. He even chuckled. The bedroom door creaked. Jung-ho looked up at his wife with an indifferent gaze. Soo-ho asked if she was going to lie down next to him. His wife stood hesitantly at the threshold. As she passed by, she began to take something from the boxes and pack it into bags. The husband thought it was a great idea. After all, he himself was not going to leave the house. Lee Yuri announced that she would find a divorce lawyer tomorrow. Her husband threw it back at her that he had already found one. The girl was surprised. After all, her husband had made the decision from the very beginning and was waiting for the right moment. And he had calculated the moment to invite Jenny to visit his home. Lee Yuri came to the conclusion that it was not worth trusting anyone. She did not want to let herself be fooled any longer. The windows on the top floor of the house were burning. Our heroine entered the building and climbed the steps. She stood in front of the apartment door for a while. Then she entered the code. The characteristic sound of electronics was heard. And then the lock opened. The clone came out barefoot to greet the hostess. He gently hugged her as if consoling her. Lee Yuri tiredly laid her head on his shoulder. Everything was happening harmoniously and as it should be. The girl buried her face in Victor's chest. And like a little girl, she began to whine. The guy asked who did this to her. The tester just sniffled. Everything our heroine had been holding back all day poured out of her eyes. Victor asked who had offended her. He asked her to tell him, promising to listen. The doctor only sniffled. The clone's consolation and embrace only further stirred up her resentment and the wound in her heart. Lee Yuri sat on the bed, partially hidden under the blanket. The guy from her story summed up that her husband was not at all suitable for family life, and he saw in him the features of a typical hypocritical freak. The girl mentally agreed with him. There were a bunch of stories that would be enough for a whole library. Victor reminded that the doctor would have to go to court, since her husband had already hired a lawyer. Touching the clone's wrist, a sound was heard and the time was displayed. The beginning of the third night. The guy suggested leaving difficult conversations for tomorrow and going to rest. The tester was even a little confused. After all, there was only one bed in this house, and it belonged to Victor himself. Lee Yuri said she didn't think it was a good idea. They weren't obligated to. Sex wasn't part of the testing. The clone said he hoped so too. While he loved his master unconditionally, He felt terrible shame when he was treated like a machine. A gentle touch on her cheek, and then a passionate kiss on her lips. The tester quietly whispered his name. Victor asked if the doctor would sleep with him. She gave the clone a languid look from her brown eyes. Morning, blue sky, slices of bread being put into the toaster, jars of various breakfast spreads. The cup was filled with milk. The clone laid breakfast for Lee Yuri. Then he put on some pleasant, relaxing music on a vinyl record. The doctor entered quietly so the guy didn't even notice. She recognized the melody. It was Mozart's Piano Concerto with Orchestra, Part 2. It was a surprise for the girl that Victor turned on her favorite classical music composition. Lee Yuri inhaled. After sniffing, the tester said it smelled quite delicious. She noticed breakfast prepared for her on the table. The girl brought a slice of bread to her mouth. The clone watched her movements carefully, and then he asked for her opinion on the taste. The tester said that she liked it. Victor thanked her. The girl wanted to apologize for treating the clone like that yesterday. She spread the snack on a slice of bread and asked if the guy was comfortable sleeping on the couch. Victor admitted that he couldn't fall asleep, and he tossed and turned all night. The girl froze from what she heard, even stopping to apply the ointment. Established direct eye contact. Accused him of lying. The tester knew that clones could fall asleep at any time of day. The guy tensed up. The doctor advised the subject to turn on the power-saving mode. The girl was surprised that the clone could deceive the owner. She wondered if this was possible. Victor understood that the doctor wanted to check him every time. He understood that he was not human at all. Lee Yuri demanded that he not twist the story, but answer her question. She asked why he lied. The guy answered that he simply wanted to calm her down. The clone believed that calming down worked best when he found himself in a similar situation. The doctor was amazed that such complex programming was possible. Victor said that he could lie if the untruth would bring joy to his mistress. Lee Yuri said that she hated lies more than anything else. She demanded that the clone always be honest with her. He promised to follow the order. And our heroine caught herself treating him like a clone again. She asked for forgiveness, justifying herself by saying that she didn't like being deceived. Victor wasn't angry at all. He just wanted to know more about the hostess. The company's models were presented on a screen placed in a circle. The question arose, will the clones become more expensive? The colleague replied that the price would be twice as high as it is now. In the past, clones fulfilled human wishes. But this new model was trying to make her owner happy. Changing the subject, the girl asked Lee Yuri how things were going with Jong-ho. The doctor paused, looking down sadly. Then she quietly said that her husband had cheated on her. The colleague thought that this was entirely possible. The man had a good appearance. He was cheerful and sensitive. From the outside, it seemed that there was always a lot of female attention with such a man. The question arose, who was his new passion? Dr. Lee asked if she knew Jenny from Hongbo's team. The colleague described the girl's appearance and asked if she was sure about it. Our heroine reported that her husband had dragged Jenny home yesterday. And then he said that he wanted a divorce. The girl hugged her colleague. She simply couldn't believe that they were having an affair in the office. When clones were invented, people whose relationships went beyond the pale disappeared from society. But with the owner of the company, things were different. The lady stated that the clones were guided by the rules established by humans, and the humans themselves adhered to moral standards. She insisted that morality was the foundation that separated people from clones. Therefore, the company's employees were required to be highly moral. Deviant behavior, assault, drug addiction, gambling, adultery were punishable in this group. Because it led to the deterioration of its image. Lee Yuri wondered whether she should have reported the incident to the company's human resources department. But she insisted that management shouldn't have known about it. The thing was, Jenny was a distant relative of the company's president, and so if her husband decided to get together with Jenny, the scoundrel had additional career opportunities from that. The girl's eyes widened at this conclusion. Heels clicked on the tiles of the hallway as Lee Yuri strode forward with long strides. The doctor clenched her teeth tightly from suppressed emotions. Without looking at those around her, she walked into the Hongbo team office. Jenny greeted her colleague with restraint and coolness. She asked him to get straight to the point. Lee Yuri asked why the young girl needed a married man. She replied that she had always been patient with the doctor, but now her behavior was unbearable. Our heroine urged him to stop having relations with her husband right now, and in return, she promised not to report the incident to management. Jenny expressed pity for her colleague and suggested doing as she wished. Lee Yuri said that the young lady's behavior was a disgrace to the entire famous family. But she did not want to interfere with the madwoman. The girl was surprised that such a crazy person was hired as a tester in the company. She suggested erecting a monument to Dr. Lee Jong-ho for his patience. She considered him an incredibly tolerant person. The doctor was overcome with rage. She gave the young, impudent girl a resounding slap with her right hand. Her colleagues in the office watched the unfolding drama with horror. Jenny glared at her rival from under her brow. The office colleagues began to whisper among themselves. The homewrecker whispered to our heroine. She believed that Jung-ho was worth her love. Dr. Lee realized that she had not been wrong in her guess. She asked when it all began. She wondered whether the couple was planning to legalize their relationship immediately after the divorce. Our heroine reassured herself that she had at least achieved one thing, Jenny's confession. Now she knew for sure what to do. Already in the evening, Lee Yuri, dressed in home clothes, sat at the table opposite the test clone. Victor eagerly asked what his mistress wanted. The doctor wanted her husband and his mistress to experience the same pain that had been inflicted on her. The clone sat with his eyes closed, his chin propped up in his hand. The tester realized that a highly efficient process was being loaded. The artificially created guy calculated numerous options for revenge. Victor opened his eyes. He voiced the possibility that Jenny would be in his and her husband's house today. He suggested that the girl had spent the previous night there. Yuri asked if it was worth going there and checking everything out. The doctor thought that in any case during the testing period, it was necessary to go out with the clone. It was necessary to check how it would behave in public. Our heroine decided to go. But first they went into a store. Victor offered to buy a mini camera. The doctor didn't understand why. This was the only way to monitor the house. Yuri assumed that her husband could have already deleted her biometric data from the castle's memory. The clone doubted it. He assumed that Jong-ho was incredibly proud of himself right now. He looked down on his wife and enjoyed his superiority. Lee Yuri agreed with his arguments. The subject's words sounded quite convincing, so she called him Uncle Freud. Victor asked the seller for 2 all-round cameras that would shoot in high resolution and record sound. She asked for identification. Lee Yuri handed over hers in response. The saleswoman looked at the couple in surprise. The doctor reassured herself that the girl hardly noticed that there was no clone in front of her. But she was still a little worried about it. After all, by law, all clones had to be branded. However, Victor was still a test model, and they were supposed to release him only in a month. That's why he didn't have a brand. The saleswoman's gaze betrayed everything she politely kept silent about. It spoke for her. "You are so handsome." Victor asked the girl why she was looking at him from the table intently. The saleswoman realized that she had lost control of herself. The handsome man put his arm around his companion. He suggested that they go and buy a bag at the same time. A silent question froze on the girl's face. He promised to tell her everything later. The saleswoman realized that the brunette was his girlfriend. The tester thought to herself that the clone had been developed with great care. It was getting dark. The sky above the city was getting dark. Lee Yuri began to doubt that her husband had already returned home from work. Victor suggested that they wait for another chance. The doctor was afraid that Jong-ho might return while they were installing the cameras. The clone said that was why he bought the bag. In order to pretend that she came to pick up things. There shouldn't be any problems with that. Yuri was surprised by the subject's ingenuity, and she assumed that he could be created as a private detective. Victor asked her not to smile so sweetly. Our heroine mechanically drove the car, and she asked herself if this whole situation was really meant to catch her husband with his mistress. The tester was even more surprised that, in addition, she was going to do the job together with a clone who was created for love. Soon, Lee Yuri stood in front of her house. The windows of the apartments were lit up. Every room was bustling with life. The doctor slammed the car door and set the alarm. She looked at the clone. It seemed like the guy wasn't worried at all. Victor said that it was his duty to love and be loved by his mistress. She could throw the clone away, and that was the only thing the boy was worried about. Our heroine knew that even before autumn came, Victor would be sent to the store counter, and it would be in the sad city of Pyongyang. The girl was sad that there was less than a month left. She looked at the clone's perfect face. The guy said he noticed sadness on her face, and he asked with apprehension whether the owner was really going to throw it away. Of course, our heroine was not able to interfere with the company, but she answered negatively that she did not intend to do this. Victor pressed the elevator button. The doctor reminded him that her apartment was on another floor. The clone believed that if her husband was already at home, he could hear the sound of the elevator. Therefore, he suggested going up 2 floors below and then walking. Soon they were at the door of the apartment. Victor listened, and the doctor looked around. The clone concluded that no one was home yet. Yuri nodded silently. Then she looked at the biometric sensor for scanning the retina. Mentally begged him to open up. There was a characteristic sound. The doors opened by themselves. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. The couple entered the dwelling. The lights were not turned on. The clone went forward into the hall. There were many dirty dishes on the table and empty alcohol containers underneath. Victor blocked the entrance with his body from the mistress, which caused her indignation. The guy said that he wanted to spare her such a sight. Yuri grabbed him by the shoulder and pushed him aside, and resolutely moved deeper into the room. What she saw horrified her. Scattered things, wine stains on the carpet. Traces of the previous evening's party made her feel nauseous, and on the family photograph there were traces of a cocaine line and a psychotropic drug pill. The man clarified why his wife asked. People don't need a reason to fall in love, just like they don't need a reason to hate. Nothing was needed either. Nevertheless, there were requests to talk. After all, she was a wife, and she believed that she had the right to know what was going on. The brunette towered over her. Since Yuri insisted so much, he decided to tell her. After the wedding, when they started living together, hated everything that was connected with her. Lee should have said it, admitted it at the very beginning. Then it wouldn't have come to this, and his wife wouldn't have bothered him, or would have tried to change. He closed his eyes and scratched his head. He said slowly that all this irritated him. The girl opened her mouth and was amazed. Taken aback, she asked again, and received a direct answer that she herself was the one who was annoying. Clenching her fists, she ordered Lee Jung-ho to apologize. He frowned and asked why on earth he would do that. They were married, and that meant cheating in marriage. Didn't he want to apologize to his wife, at least out of common politeness? The cruel ex clarified. Was the wife seriously trying to pick on politeness now? Our heroine understood what Lee wanted from her. The young man wanted to discuss the terms of the divorce, the division of property, for example. The room was in semi-darkness. There was complete chaos all around. Empty bottles, spilled wine, overturned furniture. The frame with the photo was overturned on the table. There was a white film on the glass above. The photo frame was mercilessly dirty. The brunette's eyes widened at what she saw. Even the tiniest bit of affection she felt evaporated without a trace. Noticing the reaction, Victor decided to support her. Put your hand on her shoulder, asked to look at this from the other side. Because of the mess, there will be no trace of their presence visible. And of course, they will never see the cameras. Carefully running her finger over the photograph, Yuri collected the powder and brought it to her face, wondering what it was. Taking the lady's hand in his own, the clone sniffed it, after which he pronounced the verdict that it was clearly drugs. There was no doubt about it. Her husband was taking illegal drugs with another woman. The lady clenched her fists almost to the point of pain. Her knuckles turned white. She finally realized that such a freak was not worth an ounce of her jealousy. After that, she glanced at the photo lying there again. It was her photo with Noel, and it was completely ruined. She repeated the name with a sad look. Noticing the attempts, Victor asked not to clean the thing. Otherwise, people would understand that they were present here. However, Miss did not give up her attempts. She tried hard to wipe off the photo frame. Having called the clone by name, he waited for a response. He raised his eyebrows and waited for the continuation. The doctor stuttered, saying that it was her dead child, and she simply couldn't leave him like that. Pressing the frame to her chest, the girl began to shake. The clone hugged her from behind, trying to calm her down and bring her to her senses. He looked down and apologized to his companion. An empty gaze was directed at the once happy family. The child was smiling and the spouses were standing a little behind. Having finally put the photograph back in place, the doctor listened to her interlocutor. First, it was necessary to obtain evidence of where the couple was together, in order to prepare for the trial. When she came to her senses, she asked Victor to install one camera next to the smoke detector in the living room, and another one between the mirror decorations in the bedroom. Mysteries swirled in her head about why Jenny was dating her husband, a married man, and even hosting a drug party. Rage was coursing through his veins, although it was still a question of who had dragged whom into that abyss of dependence. Another plot was possible, that they used drugs alone and met thanks to that. And yet why? What was the truth? Lee Jung-ho walked down the hallway, looking down while adjusting his tie and tightening it even more. Walking into the living room, I realized that nothing had changed. Afterwards, I sat down on the sofa. Victor handed the hostess a small thing. From that moment on, everything that happened in the living room and bedroom was saved in a video file. The girl could use this to check. After that, she took the tablet and looked at the young man uncertainly. If it weren't for him, the brunette wouldn't have even this tiny sense of confidence. So as a sign of gratitude, she covered his hand with her palm. Without stopping physical contact and looking into his eyes, she modestly thanked him. Victor smiled slightly in response. After that, she squeezed the interlocutor's hand. Not understanding what this gesture meant, the clone raised his eyebrows in exclamation. Rage was spreading through the veins of the hostess. Looking at the screen, she couldn't believe her eyes. Everything that was happening in the apartment at that moment was being broadcast there. Lee Jong-ho, sitting on the sofa, reached his hand towards the table. Then he picked up a bag of pills. Frowning, Victor noted that the hostess's husband was planning to take drugs again. This irritated the two of them very much. Unsuspecting, Jong-ho sat quietly. He stared at the frame and began to pour out the powder. She wanted to scream so that her husband wouldn't dare do this. However, she kept her thoughts to herself. He wouldn't hear her anyway. Having taken the substances, Dr. Lee's husband leaned back, groaned, and covered his eyes with his palms. Throwing his head back, he thought about something of his own. At the same time, he kept moaning. From the horror of everything that was happening, the lady covered her mouth with her hand. And she did not want to believe it. Noticing his smug smile and empty gaze, she was horrified. She had only one desire, only to kill him. Kill and burn. She had never realized it was possible to want someone dead so much. It made her hands instantly clench into fists. The picture of the smiling boy was still in front of my eyes. Once they were all happy, she began to whisper the name of her dead son. A tall, red-haired young man stood near the shelves. There were several other people around the library. One of them was sitting with headphones on. Not paying attention to those around her, she was reading a book. The guy came closer. I brought my hand closer and dropped a small folded piece of paper next to her, thereby interrupting her selfless reading. The brunette looked at the bundle, surprised. Then, taking off her headphones, she turned to the young man who had arrived. Smiling and looking into the girl's eyes, he watched her reaction. And then he sat down on a chair standing nearby. Our heroine had a son, a child born from Noel. She named the child after his father, Noel. But life needed thrills. The entire spacious studio kitchen was visible through the panoramic windows. The brunette was wearing an apron. He was busy preparing dinner. The steak was being fried in a frying pan. At the same time, the clone was cutting cherry tomatoes into halves. The dish being prepared sizzled. Victor, tearing himself away from his chores, glanced at the hostess. Dr. Lee Yuri watched the events in her home transmitted by the camera to the screen of her tablet. Her head was bowed and her face was sad. Jong-ho leaned back on the sofa and spoke on the phone, and asked the subscriber if he should expect her today. Into our heroine's ear, there was an earphone inserted. She heard that conversation. Her husband asked his interlocutor to put on what she had on last time. He liked that. The girl shuddered with suppressed anger. She asked herself if her husband was really like that. The clone placed a ready dish with egg, vegetables, and greens on the table. And after finishing everything in the kitchen, he took off his apron. His gaze was focused on the hostess. Yuri had been sitting in the chair without changing her position for a long time. The girl did not take her eyes off the tablet screen. Victor quietly came closer, gently touched her shoulder, called out to his mistress. The girl shuddered and looked up at him. The guy sat down next to him. Their faces were level. The clone assured him that before he could act, he needed to gather his strength and eat. Yuri agreed easily. The table was already set. The girl liked the presentation and table setting. The subject helped her sit down. The clone quoted a line from the movie Notting Hill. The tester knew that, like the other elite clones, he had many novels and movies loaded into his memory. This data was needed in order to distinguish human values and views on the future. Yuri asked the guy if he would betray her. The clone replied that he did not know such a definition. The clone sadly looked away. At that moment, our heroine felt guilty. Her heart suddenly felt heavy. The guy was pouring wine into her glass, and the doctor was sorry that she couldn't tell Victor the truth about him being a test sample, and that they would get rid of him after a month. But apart from the guilt she felt towards the subject for deceiving her, the girl was haunted by fear. Yuri wondered if she would be able to let this man go in a month. Our heroine continued to watch her husband's actions on the tablet screen. Jong-ho stood up from the sofa to greet the guest. Yuri took a sip of wine from her glass. The clone was nearby. He was also watching the events on the screen. The girl was sitting on the sofa. Jong-ho came up and took her hand. The guest opened her jacket. The guy asked the owner if this woman was the same Jenny. The tester's eyes widened. Yuri stood up abruptly. She was overwhelmed with emotion. Her face was tense, her fists clenched. The mistress caressed Jong-ho's face. Her hair was loose, her face skillfully made up. Dr. Lee realized that it was not Jenny who had come to see her husband. What had previously made no sense suddenly became so obvious. She told the clone that the woman's name was Han Lam. She was from the same department as her cheating husband. But then the question arose. Why did Jenny then answer so strangely and stand firm on her own? Something about not wanting to interfere with the madness. Besides, I suddenly remembered that barely perceptible smile on Ani's face. When her friend confessed her hesitation to ask her husband about his feelings, then Lem's face changed slightly after she said that her husband had not had sex for several years. Then a colleague advised her not to report her husband's affair because that Jenny was related to the company president. Now it became clear why Jong-ho was so fixated on dividing up the property. The husband was in a hurry to discuss the terms of the divorce. He especially focused on the division of property. It turned out that money was needed to live with a foreigner, Jong-ho. Before our heroine's eyes flashed again her husband's message to Jenny. The colleague looked like a nerd. In simple clothes and glasses with large frames, short hair pulled back into a ponytail. Lem didn't stand out in any way. But all this was a mask. She had planned the course of events down to the last detail from the very beginning. Having let her hair down and taken off her robe, the girl was transformed into a sexy temptress. The husband, whom our heroine considered the last man in her life, and Ani, whom she respected as a colleague. It was difficult to describe their actions in words. Lee Yuri took off like a hurricane. The guy asked in confusion where the hostess was going. The doctor was heading to her and her husband's house. Victor grabbed her hand. He asked if the purpose of the visit was to her husband and his mistress. The girl believed that this was the best way to see for herself and catch them red-handed. Soon our heroine was racing down the steps, with clone Victor following her. Life needed thrills. After all, a predictable tomorrow would only make you sigh. She resolutely opened the door. Lee Yuri ran to the car. But clone prudently blocked the driver's door with his hand. Victor believed that in such a wound-up state the hostess would not achieve anything. The girl did not want to stay in place while they were having fun under the influence of drugs. The clone suggested calming down and planning their actions. The doctor stated that no human was capable of rational thinking in such a situation. The guy said that this was possible for him, and he reminded that he was not a human, but an artificially created clone. The couple were lying on the bed under the blanket, caressing each other. The partner was on top. Light was falling through the crack. The clone tapped the edge of the gadget with his finger. He waited. Yuri asked him what would happen if these recordings were published. Victor assumed a fine and compensation for moral damages. And even if she wins the divorce, she will be obliged to pay compensation to her husband and his mistress. Yuri suggested handing them over to the police as drug addicts. The clone asked if Jong-ho had a criminal record. The answer was no. And if so, then it is highly likely that the man will simply be fined and released. The girl was going to meet Lem tomorrow, but the clone asked how that could help. The tester understood that it was stupid and futile. She replied that she just wanted to survive. Our heroine walked along the company corridors with wide, sweeping strides. Her face was like stone. The girl approached the camera, looked into the lens. Then she entered the door code. The lock opened automatically. The doors moved apart, letting the doctor into the laboratory. The colleague greeted Yuri. She was surprised that she came so early and without warning. The tester was silent. Lem was worried that the doctor was unable to sleep again. She assumed that her husband, Jong-ho, was the reason. She took her hand in hers as a sign of empathy. Rage filled Dr. Lee. A thought flashed through her mind about the dirty hands of the traitor. She pulled her hand away, breaking physical contact. The girl asked what was the matter. She assumed that some problems had arisen. Yuri assured that everything was fine. The reason was lack of sleep. Lem admitted that this was quite natural. She understood her colleague's condition. She admitted that she did not think that everything was so serious. A colleague offered to buy her coffee. Yuri sat down. Silently watched the two-faced impudent woman. The fake friend was busy preparing coffee for two. Yuri was watching all her actions attentively. Soon Lem handed a cup of hot, invigorating drink with grains to Dr. Lee. She said that she thought about the situation, and she thought that the best way out was to let Jong-ho go. The doctor kept a pause in the conversation. She watched her interlocutor. Yuri asked why it was worth doing that. The colleague assured that a man whose heart did not belong to a girl would never return to her. Dr. Lee asked the girl why she had come to such a conclusion. Lem admitted that she had fallen in love too. Our heroine had a hard time imagining. What could be called love was dirty and drugged. Her hands that held the cup trembled treacherously. Yuri asked about personal matters. Was the girl dating anyone at the moment? She noticed that she looked happy. The colleague chuckled and nodded her head. It seemed that she even smiled slightly. But she did not want to talk about it since the interlocutor was currently going through hard times with her husband. The doctor asked what kind of person Lem's chosen one was. She found it difficult to answer. A couple of words would definitely not be enough, but he certainly had an unexpected charm. Lem couldn't help but giggle, covering her mouth with her fist. Our heroine could hardly contain herself. Laughter was like needles piercing her skin. Yuri understood that she had to pretend that she didn't know anything until the trial. But the girl just couldn't keep everything to herself anymore. The doctor clutched a cup of hot drink in her hands. She asked Lem when it all started. The girl asked again. Yuri asked a direct question. She wanted to know when she started dating someone else's husband. Lem glanced at her interlocutor. And surprised, her face changed noticeably. The smile disappeared from her face. The girl assumed that the doctor already knew everything. She assured him that it wouldn't change anything. And she began to praise Jung-ho, how incredible he was. She smiled dreamily. She assured him that Yuri had never known her husband as he really was. Subtleties of superiority and undisguised pride sounded in her manner of speaking. Our heroine was outraged. After all, they were sleeping and taking drugs. She couldn't understand what the girl could know about the man while high. Lem claimed that the substances turned her partner on, but she did not use them herself. Yuri was losing her composure. She demanded to know when her colleague started dating her husband. The girl was surprised that this was the only thing that interested Dr. Lee. She supposedly hoped that the relationship would not last long. Or perhaps Yuri believed that her husband was innocent and that Lem had seduced him. She thought it was ridiculous. After all, it wouldn't change anything. Dr. Lee's emotions grew into rage. She asked in a raised voice why her colleague, who considered her a friend, treated her like that. Lem shared that she fell in love. But it turned out that the man was married to another. The wife was left without love, and hatred took its place. That is why she considered Dr. Lee Yuri pathetic. Our heroine summed up that her colleague was on good terms with her only through pity. In confirmation, Lem chuckled contentedly. Her face twisted into a smug grimace. It was like a slap in the face to the girl who had already been humiliated by the betrayal. Our heroine clutched a cup of hot drink in her hands. A way to take revenge struck her. The cup tilted. The hot contents splashed into Lem's face. The homewrecker was completely confused. Her glasses flew off. Her face twisted in pain. Coffee stains spread across her clothes. Lem lay on the floor, clutching her face in her hands. There was a broken cup next to her. Dr. Lee stood over her, triumphant. The girl called for help. Her body was shaking. Screams of pain filled the office. Yuri said that with the scars on her face, Ani would be absolutely stunningly beautiful. The obsession passed. Dr. Yuri lived through it all in her head. She put the cup on the table. But the hand still twitched treacherously. An internal struggle between cold reason and impulsive impulse was taking place. Our heroine gave the homewrecker a long, contemptuous look. Pressed lips, unblinking gaze. But Lem was impenetrable. She suddenly remembered a conversation that immediately after marriage the girl was prescribed psychotropic drugs. Yuri didn't understand what she was getting at. Her colleague said that depression would work against her in court. The doctor was puzzled as to why she had to lose. And so she simply accepted the situation and got a divorce without any fuss. The homewrecker said that it was worth doing just that, so as not to look even more pathetic. The cup of coffee fell from Dr. Lee's hands. As it fell, it shattered into pieces of different sizes at his feet. The girl bent down and took one of them, the larger one, in her hands. The sharp pain she felt reminded her that everything that was happening was not a figment of her imagination. Scarlet blood, oozing from the cut on her fingers, dripped onto the floor. Yuri pointed the blade at her opponent. She threatened to show how far she could go, and a second later the doctor switched from threats to actions. Lem was scared. She assumed that her colleague had probably gone crazy. But in the opinion of our heroine, this is not what the homewrecker should be afraid of now. The rain pounded furiously against the window glass, and the gusts of wind made sounds like the howl of a wolf. There were drops of blood on the floor leading out of the office and beyond the door. It was clear that the injury was serious. In that office, Lem sat alone. The girl was depressed and clutching her throat. There was a first aid kit on the table. Several bottles, bandages, a pack of plasters, painkillers. A third patch was applied to the palm. A colleague said that this method was supposed to help skin cells recover faster. He promised that within a week everything would be gone, and not even a single scar would remain. Yuri thanked him reservedly. Her gaze was directed at her hands, but her thoughts were somewhere far away. Victor summed up what had happened, and also that Lee's husband and close colleague Lem were now aware of it. The clone closed the lid of the first aid kit, reminded the owner of Lem's words that she respected her, and suggested that this could very well be true. The girl voiced a rhetorical question out loud. She was puzzled by what Jenny was in this story. The clone reminded her that she was a second-generation relative of the company's director. If the road ahead ends, Yuri began her sentence, and the guy continued the saying, instead of looking back, look around, and another path will surely open up to you. The doctor decided to clear up the misunderstanding that had arisen with Jenny. The high-rise buildings stretched into the blue sky. It seemed as if their roofs touched the light clouds. Our heroine stood with her head bowed. She offered her sincere apologies to her colleague. The girl responded by assuring Dr. Lee that it would be better for both of them not to bump into each other in the future. Yuri assured that she had mistakenly assumed that Jenny was having an affair with her unfaithful husband. The colleague said that in that case she should have asked her directly. There was anger in her eyes. Her posture was closed. Dr. Lee said she couldn't do that. After all, her husband was corresponding right under her nose with someone named Jenny, and even the gift the husband received was signed by a person named Jenny. The girl was surprised by this fact. It was hard for Yuri to say that, but it seemed like a couple of scoundrels had deliberately used her name. Jenny was outraged by this. She just couldn't understand why her name was of such interest to the lovers. The doctor suggested that the choice was made because Jenny was related to the company's director. The girl was outraged by the shameless actions. It turned out that she was being used as a cover for his affair. The girl assumed that after learning about everything, Yuri came to ask her for forgiveness. Jenny, although she had never been in a similar situation, could not even imagine how much pain she was in now. And she accepted her colleague's apology. Yuri said in a quiet voice that she wanted to ask for one more favor. Dr. Lee would like to meet with CEO Hyo Ye-jin, President Hyo Jin's daughter and the company's heir. Jenny was furious that her cousin had been the main target. She was furious that she had even dared to show up with an apology. Yuri remained calm and stated that these people should be fired as a punishment in accordance with the company's philosophy. Our heroine understood what Lem said about respect, because she understood the abilities of the best clone tester in the country. That's why the girl decided to put everything on the line with these words. She asked Jenny to do it for the sake of the company's most qualified testers. Both girls looked at each other for a while without blinking, with frowning faces and pursed lips. Jenny was the first to lower her eyes and sigh. She finally gave in to Dr. Lee's request. Yuri remained standing on the street, and the young colleague went into the company's office. Soon the girl inserted a wireless earphone into her ear, and the name of the subscriber appeared on the smartphone screen. Many people said that Director Ho Jin was a brilliant businessman, whose business was rapidly growing, and he lived an ideal life. But no one mentioned the terrible tragedy that befell his family. 30 years ago, his wife and son were killed in a terrorist attack at a shopping mall. Hyo Ye-jin, his daughter, who miraculously survived, took on the role of the company's first lady. And like a business partner, she often accompanied her father in public. However, in recent years, news about the executive director has completely disappeared from the information space. There were rumors that the girl was suing Ho Jin for control of the company. Or they said that she could not appear in public because of mental illness. But the girl was still at the head of the company. Therefore, Yuri had to meet her. After a short phone conversation, Jenny returned to Dr. Lee and told him that Ho Ye-jin wanted to meet her in person. However, this will only be possible if the doctor takes with her the clone she was currently testing. Yuri's eyes widened in surprise. She said as if to herself that she meant Victor. Jenny asked the test subject's number. She said that he was a new model of a dating clone. The tester's answer was affirmative. The girl clarified who Victor was. Dr. Lee explained that she had given the clone being tested a name. Jenny guessed that the director would be very interested in him. The girl asked what Dr. Lee thought. Our heroine parked her car under cover near her house in the evening, and she looked at the night sky for a long time, lost in thought. Yuri always did this when she wanted to calm down. She looked at where Noel lived. Memories of him gave the girl peace of mind. The clone quietly approached from behind, offered to come in when she was ready. A short agreement from her side. The girl closed her eyes. She was trying to solve the question. Why did the director agree to the meeting only if she took Victor with her? The answer never came to our heroine's mind. She opened her eyes. She looked at the clone in silence for a long time. Victor stood before her, focused and reserved but ready to be useful to his mistress every second. Dr. Lee extended her hand. She beckoned the subject to come with her. She could not afford to let her guard down for a second. The guy was tense. His lips were pressed together. After a pause, he reached out his hand in response and carefully took the tester's fingers. It was already dark outside. All the panoramic windows facing the terrace were lit. 3 people were sitting in a spacious room with a high ceiling. The interior was in subdued colors and modern. Footsteps were heard. Jenny, Dr. Lee, the clone all turned their heads towards the sound. The woman was holding onto the railing as she went down. Refined with bright makeup, dressed in light colors. She looked elegant, reserved, and moved confidently and gracefully like a cat. Short hair perfectly styled, large earrings, bangs falling over her eyes. She could be called a beauty. Tall with a good figure, her seemingly simple light dress successfully emphasized her waist. The 3 stood up to greet her. Jenny introduced Dr. Lee to her cousin. Yuri politely said the standard greeting. She apologized for taking up her time. Yejin glanced sideways at the boy. She asked if he was the latest clone model. Victor turned his gaze to the lady. But he was reserved and cold. Ho Yejin was also tense. After a pause, the acting director hospitably suggested that they have dinner first. And with a gesture, she invited them to come in. The table with appetizers was already set. The dish with tomatoes and greens was complemented by asparagus. The lady said that Jenny had already told her briefly, but she wanted proof. But now that she had it, there was no doubt. The director also received a report that researcher Lee Jong-ho was abusing drugs at home. Our heroine was surprised. She realized that Ye Jin was the heiress of the company, but it was difficult to do this in one day. Victor sipped wine from his glass with restraint. The director said that this could seriously damage the company's image. Therefore, the man will be fired immediately, and researcher Lim will be stripped of her rank and demoted. She will also be suspended for 6 months. Heo Ye-jin looked through the wine in her glass at the clone and then at the tester. She asked if this was enough. Our heroine clenched her fists. She never expected the executive director to take such drastic measures. Dr. Lee thanked Heo Ye-jin in a reserved but sincere manner. Jenny praised her cousin more familiarly. Ye-jin offered the company's lawyers assistance, so that she would be in a better position during the divorce. Our heroine doubted that everything was going very smoothly. The girl knew that director Heo Ye-jin was not the type to devote her time to an ordinary employee. She stated that of course she was doing all this for the good of the company. Our heroine felt as if her thoughts had just been read. There was silence at the table for a while. Yuri waited for the director to initiate communication. Ijin concluded that the business for the day was over. She asked Victor if he loved his mistress. The clone briefly confirmed. The director noticed how the guy's eyes sparkled. It really looked like love. And it looked very natural. The lady asked Victor to tell her what he thought about love. She did not look at him but stared into space. The guy said it was too hard for a clone to give a clear answer. But he had the latest data that love is an emotion, because of which the heart was yearning to touch or hold the person dear to you in a strong embrace. Ho Ye-jin was disappointed and seemed bored. She fidgeted with the glass. She asked the clone what he dreamed of doing while waiting for Dr. Lee Yuri, holding her hand or hugging her. Victor said that he wanted both, and he also wanted to do everything for the happiness of his mistress. Ye-jin asked again. The clone said that this was his own understanding of love. The director thought he was presumptuous. Heo Ye-jin suggested that the guy take the test since he loved his mistress so madly. Dr. Lee was at a loss. She fiddled with her fingers. She quietly responded in agreement. The director took a sip of red wine from her glass. She put it on the table. A drop of the noble drink flowed down the glass. The lady told Victor to give her a kiss. The tester doubted whether she had heard correctly. She was horrified when she realized the situation. Jenny was also quite surprised. The director offered the clone to kiss her as well as his mistress. Victor coldly asked if this kiss would be of any benefit to his mistress. Yezin ordered Dr. Lee to convey the meaning of this command to her clone. Our heroine was also surprised by Director Ho's request. The clone looked at Yuri, waited for her word. The tester called his name. She looked down, clenched her hands into fists. The sound of a chair creaking was heard. Victor stood up to his full height. He strode towards Ho Ye-jin. The clone stopped next to the CEO of the company that created it. The lady encouraged him. She demanded that he kiss her as passionately as he could. The clone looked for contact with the mistress. She nodded to him almost imperceptibly. Victor touched Ho Ye-jin's face. Then he leaned down to bring his face closer. The subject's lips touched the director's lipsticked lips and merged in a kiss. Yuri watched the events with excitement. The tester saw the back of Victor's head. She pressed her fist to her chest. Her heart suddenly ached. She assumed that it was jealousy. The couple broke contact. Ye-jin chuckled contentedly. She said that she had never had such a kiss before, and admitted that the clone was truly created for love. And now the lady was dying of curiosity about how good his other body parts were. She touched the corners of his mouth. Ye-jin wanted to hear the clone's answer, but Victor believed that he was obliged to answer only the mistress. His words made the director laugh. She said it was interesting. Lee Yuri tensed up and kept her eyes on the CEO. They soon said goodbye. Dr. Lee got behind the wheel. She complained to the clone that the meeting had been unpleasant. Victor expressed understanding, adding that it was hard to stand the upper-class people. The girl assumed that the subject had learned this from some movie or TV series. The clone saw how upset Dr. Lee was. He called out and gently took Yuri's hand. Their fingers intertwined and squeezed together. He asked if the mistress felt anything when he was forced to kiss her. Our heroine squeezed the clone's hand even tighter. The girl didn't want to tell Victor, but she couldn't lie to him either. The tester looked him in the eye. She said that he knew how to ask questions that were difficult to answer. She asked if Victor really wanted to know this. The guy nodded silently but clearly in response. The doctor bowed her head. She said it hurt and she was jealous. The young man took her hand again. He asked her to cleanse him. Yuri, not understanding, asked him again. Victor pointed to his face and offered to cleanse his lips with her kiss. The clone fixed her hair. The tester suddenly remembered how Victor kissed the director. It was supposed to be a kiss that would show the guilt that was overwhelming her, and how much her heart was breaking with jealousy. Yuri filled the kiss with gratitude and at the same time sadness from constantly suppressing her desires. Our heroine was lying on her back on the bed. The clone, being on top, covered her with kisses. The tester asked them to stop in a quiet voice. She assured them that it was unacceptable for them to go further. Victor asked the reason. After all, he felt that his mistress also passionately desired him. Yuri admitted that her body was attractive. However, she was still officially married. The guy replied that making love to a clone was not prohibited by law, and therefore could not be grounds for divorce. But Yuri couldn't do that. The subject asked if it was because she was married to a man who had gotten together with someone else and was now trying to ruin her life. The doctor sadly replied that she was unsure of herself. Victor stood up. He said that it was difficult for him to understand what the man's heart wanted. He assured that he would wait until the mistress was sure. Our heroine called out to Victor, grabbed him by the sleeve, asked him not to leave. The girl had a long dream. Through it, memories seemed to be trying to be imprinted in her memory forever. The brunette read the note and raised her surprised eyes. The young man smiled slightly and waited for her reaction. They sat like that for a while, looking at each other, not knowing what to talk about. She looked confused and surprised. She assumed that the headphones were playing so loudly that he decided to make a remark. Turning the page over, she wrote that she apologized if the music had disturbed him. However, the answer surprised. The guy also adored this group. He added that it was his father who instilled a love for these performers. Yuri, shocked, exclaimed loudly in disbelief, and assured that her dad also listened to this group all the time. The people sitting around turned to look at her. Noticing this, the girl became embarrassed. Noel's gaze was still fixed on her. Having accepted the apology, the guy wrote at the bottom in black pen, offering to have lunch together. Yuri thought for a few seconds, deciding what to answer to this question. The guy did not rush her and only looked expectantly at his interlocutor. She replied that to her great regret she could not accept the offer. After all, she was soon to leave for a long time to study in America. But she did not refuse. Sitting on the high stools at the bar, the guy clarified. She probably already guessed that his father named him after Noel Gallagher from the band Oasis. Brown eyes widened in surprise. The man who shared these memories with her was a student of aerospace engineering and was born to a Canadian father and a Korean mother. He was born on the opening day of the Olympic Games in Rio. Yuri exclaimed with happiness and surprise. The dates of birth coincided. She was also born on the 6th of August, 2016. It seemed completely unreal that they had so much in common. They liked the same beer and food, and even dressed similarly. People were walking around, and a sweet couple was chatting, not paying any attention to those around them. The girl started laughing at some strange phrase. As time was running out, another suggestion came in. Noel would like to go out again. There was regret on Yuri's face. The girl was forced to refuse. Afterwards, she explained that she was flying off to America to study in a few months. The guy's mouth fell open. As it turned out, he was also flying there soon. He was supposed to take part in the Mars project. The girl couldn't believe her luck. As Yuri replayed it all in her head, she couldn't believe it was true. This was the first time she had met a Mars project participant face-to-face. Taking its name from a film released a couple of years ago, this project was the most expensive and dangerous undertaking in human history. It was led by the Union of Space Stations from all over the world. There were many people, from completely different countries. Countless people fearlessly tried their luck to get on this colonization mission. But in the end, 200 participants were selected. And the man who had been lucky was now sitting right in front of Yuri. It was unbelievable for her. So she asked when Noel was leaving. The flight was in 99 days. After 6 months of training and into the sky, straight to Mars. The girl put her hands on her hips and shook her head. And he wasn't afraid to ask her out on a second date, although he didn't know if he'd ever come back. This statement caught Noel off guard. He pursed his lips, flinched, and tried to look away. Noticing these diligent attempts, Yuri was very amused. She grabbed her stomach and laughed. At one point, the girl thought she would just burst out laughing. Tears were already in her eyes, but her laughter did not stop. They sat and talked again. They smiled sweetly at each other, as if fate itself was talking to the girl, and she couldn't help but obey it. And that's how they fell madly in love with each other. So they spent all those 99 days together, cherishing literally every moment. They sat on the steps and showed each other posters. They shared more kisses and secrets than any other couple. And then the last day came. She cried, unable to stop her tears. But still she was forced to let go of her love. Standing in the middle of the room, they held hands. Then they clinked tin cans, drank the drink, and went to bed in their dressing gowns. After that, Yuri was the first to dive under the blanket. Noticing this, the guy decided to join her. They lay and looked at each other, and then they kissed. Flying to Mars meant living in a dead wasteland. And yet so many people wanted to get there. Sitting, leaning on a pillow, I asked if he decided to brag. The answer was negative. He just wanted to say that a lot of people were waiting for someone to refuse to fly. Looking at her expectantly, he finished the sentence. If she said stay, he would stay. Yuri knew that this was her last chance. Looking down, the girl said that then he would stay on Earth. Perhaps they would get married and have a child. He will be like her and Noel. The happiness they felt in this will not even come close to the one that awaits them in the future if the guy stays. Every night, looking at the sky, he will feel a pang in his chest. And he will be eaten away by the thought that he himself should have been on the planet. She didn't want to stop, and she would always love the memories of their time, thinking of Noel every time she looked up at the night sky. And he will know that the man Yuri loves madly is right there, at the very top. Tears welled up in the brunette's eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off the love of his life. The next moment, Lee also burst into tears. They sat there crying and looking at each other. The girl ordered him not to cry, told him not to sit as if he was dipped in water. She asked the fool to hug her and held out her arms herself. The last line of the love story began the story of her own life. A spaceship with 200 settlers on board landed safely on Mars. The presenter said that this would mark another giant leap for mankind. It was after Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. Looking tenderly at her son, who was stretching out his arms, she said joyfully, his dad was already on Mars, safe and sound. Little Noel stretched his arms towards his mother. He looked very much like his father, the same slightly fair complexion and the same light brown eyes. The room was in semi-darkness. The brunette was resting. The host reported that they had just received news that satellite communication with Mars had been restored. Contact with the group of settlers had been lost earlier. And for the first time in 9 years since the expedition was sent out, it was possible to contact them. She turned her head and glanced at the digital clock lying on the nightstand. A notification from Noel appeared. There was one unread message. Our heroine sat on the bed. She repeated Noel's name like a spell. It was hard to believe that she had received a message from Mars. Yuri read a message from the Red Planet from a man calling Beloved, the woman he dated for 99 days and broke up with 9 years ago. The girl gazed at the night sky more than 3,000 times every night for 9 years in a row. She never gave up hope for a minute that her beloved still remembered her. She missed him madly. However, instead of joy, she was now overwhelmed by resentment. For 9 long years, there had been only pain in her life. On the guy's side, there was also uncertainty. How was Yuri? Where was she working? Whether she had found her loved one? Noel assumed that she might have gotten married during this time. Or perhaps his beloved was still thinking about him. The man was ready to accept any of her positions, but he was impatiently waiting for his beloved's answer. Yuri asked herself a question, not in her mind but out loud. She didn't know if she loved Noel. She sat there with her head down in thought and couldn't answer. Morning came. Dr. Lee went down to the living room. Victor was already waiting for her there. The clone was worried about what had happened. After all, the girl clearly looked downcast. She replied that she had a nightmare. Yuri sat down at the table. The guy put a cup in front of her. He was glad it was just a dream. He said that if something was bothering her, she could share it with him. The warmth in Victor's eyes revealed to Dr. Lee the second reason for the concern Noel's message had caused. The clone caressed Yuri's hair. He complimented her. The girl realized that he had entered her heart and become a part of it. The girl understood that for Victor no one existed except her. She said that he was not obliged to warm her heart with tender words. The clone admitted that he initially doubted that she would not fall for his tricks. Yuri voiced the observation that sometimes he was more like a human than any real one. The girl pressed herself against his chest. Victor put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. They sat like that in silence for a long time that evening. Colleagues crowded around reading the announcements. Among other things, there was one about the termination of cooperation with Jung-ho Lee due to the fact that he was using drugs. It was also reported that researcher Shiori had been demoted and transferred due to insulting colleagues and causing damage to the company's reputation. Our heroine was pleased that Heo Ye-jin hadn't lied when she promised to take action. It was both pleasant and frightening to realize the boundless power of the acting director, and also the absence of the slightest pretense in his actions. Then an incoming call rang out. Looking at the screen, the girl realized that it was her husband, Jung-ho. Yuri pressed the button and accepted the incoming call. Insults immediately rained down on her, and then the question of whether she had reported it to management. The girl called her husband smart, but she didn't want to listen to his whining. She promised to dump him. Then Jung-ho started threatening. Yuri assured that this was their last conversation. She asked to listen carefully. She was going to keep all the property for herself and send him to the very bottom. The man continued to shout into the phone. His wife even heard that he began to cry. Unable to bear it any longer, she disconnected the call. Dr. Lee walked down the corridor. Entering the office, she sat down at her workplace, passing by her colleague. She offered her some tea. The girl refused Dr. Lee's offer. She was surprised by the unexpected formality in their communication. Lem reported that she was being transferred to the first warehouse in the northern province of Hamgyongdo. There was a coal mine there that was used as a labor camp for deactivated clones. The face of the former friend was tear-stained. Lem fell to her knees and began to beg Yuri to help her. Dr. Lee didn't know how she could help. After all, the couple had started this themselves. Lem had promised to break up with Jung-ho. It turned out that her vaunted love had dissipated in a couple of days. And now the girl came to beg on her knees for forgiveness and help. Yuri remembered how she came to her bleeding. Her colleague didn't even bat an eyelid. The girl continued to beg, and our heroine could hardly contain her laughter. Then Lem reached for her hand, but Dr. Lee avoided her touch. Yuri leaned over her colleague. She said that such people disgusted her to death. Jung-ho wrote a message that he wanted to meet her at a restaurant in 3 days to discuss the details of the divorce. Our heroine quickly read this while already standing on the threshold of the house. Victor met the hostess. She smiled, and then she told him about Lem and her husband. It was a damn nice revenge. The guy said that everything played into her hands. Yuri assured that without him nothing would have happened. The clone was happy that he could be useful. Dr. Lee suddenly suggested that Victor go somewhere. He asked how far the hostess was going to go. Yuri asked where the guy wanted to go with her. He lowered his eyes and assured her that he wanted to see the ocean. The doctor accepted his offer. She knew that travel with clones was only allowed to high-security cities. Some regions still had radiation exposure. Our heroine thought about it, and then enthusiastically suggested that Victor go to Cannes. The clone immediately jumped up, ready to go. He was calling for them to go. Yuri smiled. She reminded him that it was night outside, and since it was a long drive, then it was necessary to get a good night's sleep for the sake of safety on the road. The subject sat back down, accepting her rightness. Dr. Lee chuckled contentedly. The red car was driving along a mountain road. The waves were whipping the salt water into foam. Victor was admiring the view from the window. Yuri asked the clone if he was really so delighted. The guy nodded in response. Our heroine responded to Noel's message, that she was surprised by the message. It was incredible that he was able to settle down on Mars. The girl said that a lot had happened over the years. After he left, Yuri found out she was pregnant, and she decided to raise the child alone. She told me that she named her son after him, that she tried to give the baby everything she could, and she cherished the hope of seeing her beloved again. However, a tragedy happened to their son. A snake crawled into the house, and the child died from its poisonous bite. In her letter, Yuri asked for forgiveness for not being able to save her son. Then, after the child's death, she was in despair and lost all desire to live. But one man was able to bring her back to the light. He saved her from the unbearable longing for her son. Then the girl returned to Korea and married him. But their marriage was a disaster from the start. And a few days ago, she decided to file for divorce. It was hard for her to fit everything into one message, but she felt obligated to clarify her feelings to Noel. She felt that she didn't deserve to love him. Yuri admitted that after her son's death, she stopped looking at the sky. She did this out of sadness and guilt, and because of the burden of mistakes, she couldn't move forward. And so she began to forget about him little by little. The girl assured that who she had become now no longer had the same feelings for him. But she was sure that Noel remained the same wonderful person, and she was sure that he would definitely meet a beautiful girl in space. When saying goodbye, she asked him to take care of himself. A guy came up to Yuri from behind. She was surprised when he suddenly picked her up in his arms. Victor stood in the water and held his mistress in front of him, looking into her eyes. She asked him to let her go. The clone responded with stubbornness. Yuri couldn't believe that the clone no longer obeyed her orders. She asked why he was looking at her like that. The guy complimented her in return. The waves crashed noisily onto the shore. Dr. Lee walked along the sand with the clone, holding hands. They spent their time like this until sunset, and were already getting ready to go back. But suddenly, 3 dubious types approached them. Yuri shuddered at their ugly appearance alone. The mutants were unfriendly. Dr. Lee asked what they wanted. She knew that people who had been exposed to radiation were not allowed to be there. Victor covered the hostess with himself and demanded that the guys leave, but they began to laugh. They pointed fingers at her, called her a lanky person. They said she came to see a woman, not him. The clone gave a final warning in a menacing voice. Gritting his teeth, he told them to get lost. But this only caused laughter among the guys. One of them pulled out a knife. The situation quickly became heated. Our heroine did not know what to do. The mutant leader lunged forward, wanting to hurt Victor. But Victor blocked the attacker with a blow to the jaw. The brute clearly did not expect such a rebuff, but his comrade was already ready to rush at the guy. A blow to the nose knocked him down too. The third mutant pulled out a gun. Its barrel was pointed menacingly at the boy, but soon he too was lying face down in the sand with his arms twisted behind his back. He was still unable to use the pistol. Victor pressed the bastard with his knee and demanded that he apologize. He hissed the words through his teeth. The guy demanded that he ask his companion for forgiveness. The guy guessed out loud that it was easier to live with one hand than with two. He made a move. There was a cracking sound. The mutant was fidgeting on the sand. He insisted that he didn't want to die. He asked to forgive him. Yuri was horrified that her clone test subject was capable of causing harm to a person. Dr. Lee winced when she saw a trickle of blood on the clone's hand. She was worried about it. But Victor insisted that the guy could only scratch her with a knife. The condition of his mistress was more important to him. Once home, Yuri's first task was to treat the boy's wound. She knew that clones felt pain just like people. She praised him for holding up well. Victor assured that he felt both pain and happiness at the same time, which outweighed it. After all, his mistress took care of him. Smoothly, their communication and tenderness grew into kisses. First of hands, then of lips. Soon they were lying on the bed. Dr. Lee interrupted the kisses. She said sternly that the clones were forbidden to harm people. Victor was ready to accept her order. Yuri asked rhetorically if the guy was actually a clone. He replied that he wished he was human. The girl asked if he was against being scanned. The clone declared his readiness to obey her completely. The tester pressed the buttons on the touch panel. Victor lay down in the box but did not take his eyes off her. The automatic sound was heard. The lid closed and the testing procedure began. Soon it was all over. The clone asked if the owner wanted to see the results. She might be curious. Looking at the scan results, Dr. Lee realized that in 2 weeks Victor would disappear from this world. And with him, the shared experience will disappear. The clone will be taken apart, deprived of memories and melted in the furnace. The full moon rose over the city. Our heroine stood on the balcony. At that moment the phone rang. It was Heo Ye-jin. Yuri thanked the director that with her help she was able to free herself from a heavy burden. The subscriber replied that Jenny had already passed on. Her words of gratitude. A question was asked about Victor. The announcer assured that everything was fine with the test clone. The director specified that this model has 14 days left, and after this period the boundless love will disappear from the life of the tester. But Yuri wanted to know more about the development of this clone. He was more willful and emotional than previous models. The doctor wanted to ask something. The tester said that the guy had broken the law of robotics. All clones were forbidden to harm people. And Victor had broken the man's arm on purpose. Agent replied that the first law stood above all others. The clone could not allow its master to come to harm. The doctor reported that none of the previous models had done this. Ye-jin promised to look into the matter. She asked for a footnote in the report. Our heroine was disappointed. She wondered what else the clones could do, whether Victor was capable of deception. The director laughed at Yuri and asked if it was possible that the tester fell in love with a clone. At this point their conversation ended. The device's screen went dark. The girl sighed with relief. Yuri was leaving the balcony. Turning around, she saw Victor. She wondered how long the guy had been standing there. The guy started hugging her without a word. Yuri asked if he heard the conversation. She asked him to let go. The clone was stubborn. Victor didn't want his mistress to leave. He couldn't allow his beloved to leave him. The clone's blue eyes turned to the girl. Unable to resist, the guy decided to compliment her. Yuri was very beautiful today. Coming closer and sitting down at the table, the girl wanted to start eating. Victor moved a chair closer to her so that it would be comfortable. She planned to be late today. The guy asked if she had a lot to do today. Dr. Lee looked down at her plate and muttered. She had to go to meet her husband today. She spent a long time choosing her outfit. She wanted to show Jong-ho that he hadn't broken her. Noticing her condition, the clone offered to help her somehow. The analysis showed that her husband was experiencing an extreme level of aggression towards her. That is why the young man was worried. Because of these emotions, Jong-ho could easily attack her. Accordingly, cause harm. She looked up at Victor. Smiling, she asked him not to worry. After all, the former spouses met in a popular restaurant. It was just to get a divorce as soon as possible, without unnecessary litigation. The young man folded the napkin several times. Taking it from his hands, Yuri began to place it on her lap. Victor, worried that nothing would happen to her, asked her to take care of herself. He still did not take his anxious gaze off his mistress. The sun was shining brightly on the street. The brunette was sitting in a multi-story building at her desk. She was typing something quickly on the keyboard. The clicking sound could be heard and the face was completely focused on the work. It was a report, allowing clones to harm humans to protect their masters. It had to be implemented. This had to be done with extreme caution, and it was necessary to carefully study the likelihood of violations of the law. The rest of the staff were walking along the corridor. Some were talking animatedly about something. There was a large selection of food on the screen in front of Dr. Lee. She selected one menu and pressed a button. After the girl finished her report, she realized that there was no one to go to lunch with. Before all this, she usually had lunch with Lamb several times a week. There were advantages to being alone, though. Yuri didn't have to be depressed. Eating lunch alone was a completely normal thing. Sitting alone at the table, our heroine slowly devoured her food. Lost in thought, she looked out the window. And I remembered a recent conversation. The director asked if there was a possibility that Yuri had fallen in love with the clone being tested. The doctor was silent for a moment. Noticing this, Ye-jin noted that her question seemed to have offended her interlocutor. But Victor was an unusual clone in every sense, and she, as a tester, was deeply interested in him. However, Dr. Lee should not have perceived him as a clone, and she sincerely hoped that Victor would interest her as a person. Each new version released brought innovations, and it was the most advanced and well-developed model among all. Victor in particular stood out for his exceptional will. It arose as a result of development similar to that of humans. Yuri herself influenced him in this way. But if Victor was more than a clone, then wasn't deactivating him after 14 days inhumane? The sun was shining on the people passing by, illuminating them with its rays. The brunette was standing in the middle of the street. People were hurrying somewhere around. The lady entered the room. She had a coat slung over one arm. The hostess pointed to a table where someone was already waiting for her. The man was dressed in a black suit. Looking askance, he noted that the dress his wife was wearing was beautiful. There was already food and glasses on the table. Frowning, Yuri noted to herself that her ex-husband reeked strongly of cigarettes. There was already food in front of him, so he decided to explain. Jung-ho was starving, so he took the liberty of ordering. Yuri would like to separate amicably if possible. She was not happy with all this legal red tape. The man was all for it. She had to accept all the conditions and then she would be free. But the ex clearly didn't realize his situation. Our heroine was surprised that he thought he supposedly had the right to make demands. While eating and chewing, Jung-ho noted that it was smug, as if someone was standing behind it. The girl was going to leave him everything except the house, a bank account, securities, and all jointly acquired financial assets. She assumed that this would be enough. The husband laughed and noted that the financial assets were not worth a damn, so Yuri could keep them. He wanted to sell the house and split the money in half. The wife didn't like this arrangement. She inherited the house from her parents. Jung-ho had absolutely no rights. Reaching across the table, he said they owned property together. He grabbed her neck and reached for her lips. They were still a married couple. There was madness in his wife's eyes. Yuri grabbed his hand with hers. She didn't like it. She slapped him hard. Jung-ho pulled away. He hadn't expected that. Enraged by this attitude towards herself, our heroine sent her husband. He only laughed. He concluded that his sweet Yuri had a character. Rubbing his cheek, it didn't stop Jung-ho one bit. Taking hold of the bottle, the husband said that it was very sexy, after which he took a sip from the bottle of drink. His sips could be heard. The girl wanted to finish the conversation while he was still standing on his feet. This statement made him furious. Raising his voice, he asked how she dared to bark at him. Then he called her a bitch and asked her not to get mad. He reminded her that he had saved her, a pathetic old woman with a trailer. Judging by his reaction, the girl thought that he had taken drugs before coming. The husband asked if she imagined him to be a monster. Then he chuckled. But it wasn't he who ruined her life. It was the blue snake. She just needed to remember. They held eye contact for a moment. Jung-ho leaned back in his chair and sat languidly, waiting for an answer. Yuri remembered the terrifying images from the past. That same blue snake wrapped around a man. Stopping herself, she didn't understand. He was still holding the bottle but not drinking. His wife asked him how he could know that. The angry man asked what exactly. That day, the snake bit Noel and disappeared, and no one ever saw it again. Yuri wondered how Jung-ho knew that the snake was blue.